Hey everyone, and welcome back to That Engineering Girl. Today I'm doing my first ever hackathon, COVID edition especially, and so I thought it would be really interesting to take you guys along for the ride. I'm a bit quiet right now, and that's because I'm the only one that's awake in this house, but let's get to it. The introductions have already started. It's streaming on Twitch, so let's see how today goes. Alright everyone, welcome to the voiceover. So over here you can see me watching the live stream for the introductions. I am multitasking because I needed to also figure out how to use Discord. I actually knew briefly, like very high level, how to use Discord, but not to the extent where I could actually use it for the hackathon. So I'm kind of multitasking, watching that and actually watching the introductions on Twitch. You'll see that our favorite professor at UFC here is presenting. So he's one of the most famous software engineering professors here at the University of Calgary, Mohammed Moshepour. So he's actually pretty renowned too. You could probably search him up and find a couple of cool results. So just listening to him give the introductions and listen to his little speech on why he's involved and what the vision is for the hackathon, because this is the first time ever that this particular hackathon was happening. So HYL, Hack Your Learning. So just listening to him doing some multitasking work, and it's going to start in a little bit. So over here you can see me actually look through the prompt that was presented to us. So there's actually two streams. So for the stream that I was in, we had a prompt relating to a supply chain management system that would essentially allow the organization to salvage more reusable parts from furniture that they had stored. So that was pretty cool. It was a really cool prompt, and that's just what I'm looking at currently and writing a few preliminary notes on it. So then I hopped onto Discord and I connected with the rest of my team, and we kind of planned for the couple of next days that were coming up. And it turned out that a couple of our team members, so we were 4 in total, a couple of our team members weren't able to make it to the initial discussions in the morning after the prompt was presented. So I did hop on a voice call with one of my teammates, and we decided to give the prompt a more thorough read so we would have a better understanding of what was going on, and then we could move on to discussing the requirements and the high-level architecture. Alright, so you'll actually see me having breakfast here as well. My sister was kind enough to make me breakfast because I did have to jump right away into the hackathon. So I was able to get some breakfast in, so bless her soul, and I really appreciate that. Over here you'll see me making a local username or a local user account for the MySQL that's running on my machine, so it could interact and have access to the database that we were using to interact with our program, the database that was given as an example of the type of data that we would have to come across and deal with. So to make our lives easier between the team and I, because we would all be accessing this database and we would all be collaborating on this program, we set up a username and password that was common, so we could all access the database with the same line of code without needing to switch up any username or passwords, just to make our lives easier and make the workflow more seamless. Now in particular here, you'll see me getting frustrated as to why I'm not able to import the database that was provided to us, because you do need to import it if it's given as an SQL file. And this is just because the source path that you're supposed to provide is supposed to be given from all the way from the users folder, whereas I thought it would be beneath the users folder, so I was just providing it with the incorrect path. And so finally, after trying multiple times with different working directories, I was finally able to figure it out and get the database imported and have a local copy on my machine. All of us decided to take a closer look at the database that was provided. So here you can see me just looking at the data that's provided more closely at the tables, what columns were given, what column labels we have, what are the primary keys, do we have any foreign keys, and all of that good stuff. At this point, we got into the good stuff, which was discussing the high-level architecture and planning out the high-level architecture. So this involves asking the questions, what classes do we want? What relationships make sense between classes? Is it going to be, say, for example, using it as a subclass or a class on the same level, but it's being used as a field in another class? So those were types of questions that we asked ourselves, as well as, for example, what are going to be some of the error or logic checks some of the classes will have to do? What are the type of inputs and outputs some of the classes will have to do in terms of method writing and all of that jazz? How are they going to be interacting within each other? How are we going to fulfill the functionality that's required? So those were the major discussions that we were having over here while deciding how we would actually lay out the blueprint for our system. After that, we got into the large chunk of the work, which was actually determining how we would go about solving the problem that was presented, which was finding the cheapest combination of available furniture parts in order to create a whole piece of furniture that was then salvageable. So given a variable amount of parts of a furniture piece, how do we find the cheapest option, if even able to, because we may not be able to fulfill that type of order. So we needed to figure out how to solve this problem and how to solve this recursively most likely, which is the inklings that we were getting. So over here you can see us working through visualizing the problem, brainstorming some different solutions, and eventually we did end up actually calling in a professor to vet this idea and understand how feasible our idea is, because one of our major concerns were that if the number of parts or the number of different types that were available, the number of combinations that our algorithm would have to go through would exponentially increase, which would make the algorithm significantly slower and use up way more memory if we were going to do this recursively. So because of that concern, we actually ended up bringing in a professor, bypassing and vetting this idea by them in order to see if it was a viable option. And through the professor, so our mentor you could say, we were actually able to get a more detailed understanding of the actual problem, the type of data we were provided, such that all of the parts were actually priced equally between the different types. And so that actually helped us get a better understanding of the actual problem and grasp a better solution for it. So we were actually able to take the proposed algorithm that we were proposing to the instructor, tweak it a little bit to make it work better for us, and we actually decided on using that and actually implementing it to potentially solve the problem. So after 4 hours, literally 4 hours of planning and brainstorming, we finally decided to take a break for 45 minutes. So here I am taking a short break, going to fill up my water bottle. As you can see me trudging down the stairs over here, and then eventually I go and get some fresh air as well. Then I get right back to it, so I come back to my room and I do a little bit of preliminary review before touching base with my team again. Now what we do is we actually plan who's going to be writing which pieces of the code, and so we split up the classes actually. That's how we decided to split up the code, is everyone just writes one of the classes, which conveniently had only 4 classes to write. So that's how we split up the work and we went about our way. And one thing to note here is we made a decision to communicate with each other about what you could potentially use from the other class. So in particular, there was one class, one of my peers was writing which was going to be using the classes that I and another peer were writing. So we need to touch base with this person and let them know which methods they had available, what were the function definitions, what parameters were those functions taking, what were they returning, and so on and so forth. So that was our highest priority right here. And so what I did immediately is write some function definitions for him, not necessarily with the bodies, but just the function headers, and push those to Git so he would actually have an idea of what type of functions were coming his way. And this is me doing just that, so I'm actually pushing to Git over here. I do run into some problems with pull requests and the way that we set up our repository, but I do end up connecting with my team and figuring out how to fix that. Then I had a quick break to go have some dinner, and my sister and her friend who was over actually made some biryani, so that was absolutely delicious. And then on top of that, she decided to try out this Mexican cake at home, so it was actually homemade and it was absolutely delicious. The name was completely complicated. I have no idea what the name of this dish is. And I get right back to it. So over here you can see me getting a bit frustrated over my unit test not working, and it was making absolutely zero sense until I realized after connecting with my team that I was actually missing the .jar file that I needed in my working directory to actually even recognize the tests that I had written. So after making that silly and rudimentary mistake, I finally was able to run my unit test and confirm that my code was written correctly. Over here, I'm actually doing a peer review of my peer's code who was writing the more complex algorithm that was actually checking and finding the cheapest combination of used furniture that was available. And so over here, I'm just reviewing it with him over the different methods that he's written and pointing out a few mistakes that I noticed here and there, and really just reviewing the code and offering some insights that I had from my side. Doing a bit of a time skip here, as you'll see that it's now night. I actually had to go back to my code and debug a bug that I realized I had in my code because it was showing up later on in some of the other unit tests that I wrote. Now, it took me the longest time to find this bug because it was actually hidden in the query that I was sending to the database through Java, and this was simply a syntax error because I was sending in the query as a string itself, but one of the parts of the string actually was required as a string. That's how MySQL would recognize it as what I needed it to recognize it as. And finally, after figuring that out after the longest time, as I mentioned, I actually went back and started writing the unit tests for my peer's code for the complex algorithm that our program had to deal with. After a long day of hacking, I then called it a day and decided to go to bed. The next morning, the team met up and I actually brought up some of the errors or some of the problems that I ran into when writing unit tests for the algorithm that my peer wrote. And we actually decided to debug as a team through VS Code. So, because we thought all hope was lost if this algorithm was not working, but we decided to push through and just push through for these last couple of hours that we had to submit our project, and we did so by debugging through VS Code. Surprise, surprise, miraculously we were able to figure out what was going wrong in the unit test, actually, because I wasn't aware of the workflow that my peer was using to actually execute the functionality that we needed. So that's a lesson learned for the future. But eventually we figured it out, and the algorithm actually worked, and we all were extremely happy. So we wrapped up the project, did some final touches, and did our final presentation to submit. Alright everyone, update. It actually worked. Oh my god, we were all so astonished because I literally woke up this morning thinking there's no way this is gonna work. The other guy who was working on the other algorithm, the tough algorithm, he also thought it wasn't gonna work. And I was like, done. I was like, this is not gonna work, right? And I mean, I like to have a positive attitude, but I also like to be realistic. And the unit test, it was messed up. Like, I was getting errors upon errors upon errors, right? And so I was just like, there's no way we can debug this before the deadline for the hackathon. But we somehow did it, and we somehow got it to work, and we somehow squeezed in additional like 1 or 2 features. So like, oh my god, if we actually win this, I'm gonna be so proud of my team and I. Like, first hackathon, and if we actually win something, then oh my god. So I'll keep you posted. Alright, so update, we unfortunately did not win anything, but honestly I do not care about that, because frankly speaking, this weekend was super fun, super useful in terms of learning a ton of technical and professional skills. For example, like debugging, rapid prototyping, and skills along the same lines. So super useful weekend. I had a great time. My team and I had a lot of fun, banging our heads against the walls, because that happened more than I'd like to admit. But regardless, this weekend was awesome, and I hope you had a fun time watching me. So with that, until next time.